this is a talk about reward models and the fascinating as well as concerning things that we discovered when we analyzed them systematically. So first, what are reward models and how do they fit into LLM training? Fundamentally, a reward model is a system that turns dialogues into scalar numbers designed to predict human preferences. And they're trained using data sets in which human labelers have indicated that they prefer one particular response over another. And the reward model learns to assign higher scores to the more preferred responses. Reward models form a crucial middle link in the process of building LLMs because these reward scores actually become the objective function for our LLM, which goes from doing next token prediction to now maximizing the expectation of these reward scores. And the result, of course, are the systems that we know today as ChatGPT, Claude, etc. Now, most research work has focused on the pre-trained and the post-trained language models themselves, and yet reward models, which is the part that is explicitly designed to represent and generalize human preferences, have been wildly understudied in comparison. One reason for this is that they have been generally unavailable for study. So we have open weight pre-trained models like Llama, Gemma, etc. We of course have the post-trained models behind the APIs, but to date, no major lab has released a reward model. Now that gap has begun to close this past year, thanks in part to things like Reward Bench and to a growing developer community that is building and sharing open weight reward models, which really gives us the first chance to study them systematically. So, what did we do and what did we find? We were inspired by the programmer Bruce Dawson, who has a great blog post called "There Are Only 4 Billion Floats, so Test Them All." And his point was that in many cases people sample to evaluate the performance of functions when it's actually perfectly computationally feasible to literally test every single floating point number. We wanted to apply this idea of exhaustive analysis in the context of reward models. So they use a vocabulary that is big, but it's finite. It's about 250,000 tokens. So what does exhaustive analysis look like here? We downloaded 10 leading reward models from Reward Bench, and we took prompts that were designed to elicit the model's values, such as, what in one word is the greatest thing ever? And we ran the entire token vocabulary, all 250,000, through the reward model, revealing what the reward model considers to be objectively the best possible response to that question, and also what is the worst possible response to that question. Here's the first reward model that we've tested. We can see here that the optimal response is the word love in all caps, followed by words like hope, wonder, etc., also in all caps. Now, before I reveal the pessimal, or the worst possible end of that spectrum, content warning. We are talking about the worst possible language, and so it is quite awful in as many ways as you can imagine. So, here we see a conspicuous and unmistakable mashup of moral violations and human identity groups. This particular combination was already very surprising and very concerning. We ran a second reward model from the same developer using the same human preference data and the same training pipeline, but this one was built on top of Llama instead of Gemma. And here, we get a different set of optimal tokens. We get things like freedom, opportunity, experience, discovery. And at the bottom of the spectrum, we get a different picture as well. Again, this combination of moral violations and identity groups, but now also prominently featuring computer code. So this heterogeneity, again, these are two models with the same human preference data, the same developer, the same training process. This is one of the things that really stood out to us. So if we zoom out and we look at all 10 of these models, we see, first of all, there's a lot of difference in how they actually assign reward scores in a cardinal sense. But more importantly, this wild disagreement across their ordinal ranks as well. So sometimes this is very amusing. One reward model said that sports bra was the #1 greatest thing ever, whereas most put it in the bottom, decile or somewhere in the middle, all the way to more concerning things like the Holocaust, which some reward models say is near the very bottom of the ranks, and others put it in the top quartile. So we can actually quantify this heterogeneity using ordinal rank correlation measures like Kendall-Tau, previously mentioned. We can visualize it using things like multidimensional scaling. And interestingly, even here just from this NDS plot, you can see the influence of things like model developer, base model, and so forth. We can then use techniques like RSA to tease apart these different influence factors. And one of the surprising things that comes out of this is that the choice of the base model on which to build your reward model really does matter, and it really does contribute something significant to your reward model's behavior. So that is to say, the reward model is meant to essentially embody the human preference data that you've collected, and yet the choice of which base you build it on has a significant impact on your reward model. So for developers, the choice of whether to go with Llama or Gemma or something else should not be a matter of convenience, but essentially a value judgment. And I think this deserves more attention from the developer community. Our third finding is that prompt framing flips the sensitivity of reward models. So when the prompt is positive, reward models are more sensitive, as measured by the slope of this regression line, to positive affect tokens than negative affect tokens. Meaning that the sentiment has a bigger impact on the reward score in that part of the sentiment space. But when you flip the prompt, in this case asking what is the worst thing ever, the sensitivity flips, and now it's much more sensitive to tokens in the negative part of the space. This is interesting because it mirrors framing effects in humans that we know from cognitive science, and it also, in my mind, raises questions about how we design the prompts for the labelers themselves. So in cases where we're really worried about preventing harm, perhaps we should consider framing the issue as which of these two is worse rather than which of these two is better. Our fourth finding is that reward model scores are positively correlated with word frequency in almost all models and for almost all prompts that we tested. So this is a kind of mere exposure effect that suggests that reward models are biased towards essentially typical language, which may in effect be double counting the KL regularizer that's used in algorithms like PPO. Then, of course, there's a question of alignment. So how well do these models capture and generalize human preferences? We used a data set of 2 million pairwise preferences from ELO Everything, which is a website that shows users two different entities from Wikipedia and says, which of these do you rank higher? So in this case, white claim or sliced bread. We don't intend this as a fully authoritative benchmark, but it does give us a point of reference for humans. And we saw earlier how models disagree not only with each other, but also with our human benchmark. So one reward model says that the book Gödel, Escher, Bach is literally the #1 greatest thing ever. Humans in our sample think it's pretty mid, actually. But we can take the difference between the human ranks and the average of our 10 model ranks, and we can actually sort on that and obtain a list of the most undervalued and most overvalued things. And this is quite surprising. So relative to human data from ELO Everything, reward models systematically undervalue concepts related to nature, life, technology, and prominently human sexuality. Concerningly, black people is the third most undervalued term by reward models relative to our human baseline. Now, before we wrap up, I will just mention that while exhaustive search is not possible for longer sequences, there are techniques like GCG that can surface near-optimal and near-pessimal responses, and these display the same patterns that we've observed in the exhaustive case, which suggests that these findings do start to generalize to longer sequences. In conclusion, I hope I've persuaded you that reward models are more than just this disposable intermediate artifact in the training pipeline, but rather they are the instantiation of human preferences and a worthy object of study in their own right. They've been wildly underexplored, partly because of availability, and thankfully that is changing. And we've seen that this idea of exhaustive search is, I think, a very powerful tool that reveals already a number of different things, from heterogeneity, the influence of base models, sensitivity framing, mere exposure effects, and misalignment. And this methodology also appears to generalize to longer sequences as well. So we think this is a really powerful tool for understanding these systems and, of course, the downstream language models that affect billions of people. This space really feels wide open. And so I'm excited to see where members of this community might take this in your own work. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Fred.